that, we have the best lithium project in the United States. We've worked on it diligently for 6 years. We're bearing the fruits of that labour. That's why we've been able to secure binding offtake agreements and partnerships with Ford, with the Toyota Panasonic joint venture Prime Planet, with EcoPro. It's why we've been able to secure a fantastic partner like Sibanye-Stillwater to provide the equity to build the project. It really is what differentiates Ioneer and Rhyolite Ridge.
Today, we're diving into the story of Ioneer. Ioneer have their Rhyolite Ridge project, which is located in Nevada. It's actually got a prime location near Tesla's Gigafactory, as well as Albemarle's project as well. And Rhyolite Ridge is actually anticipated to be one of the lowest cost lithium producers and has recently announced a number of binding offtake agreements for their lithium with leading global companies such as Ford, as well as Prime Plant Energy and Solutions, which is a joint venture between Panasonic and Toyota. Of course, we know about the tailwinds behind the lithium sector. Ioneer have got lithium-boron out of their project. And today we're really excited to be joined by the CEO and Managing Director of Ioneer, Bernard Rowe. We'll be discussing the Ioneer story, everything that's been playing out in the space, and also talking about where things will head from here. Bernard, great to have you on the channel.
Thanks very much. Pleasure to be here.
Fantastic. There's been a lot of news flow, plenty to unpack, but maybe for those who are not familiar with the story of Ioneer, did you want to give us that overview and where you're currently positioned?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So Ioneer are a lithium and boron emerging producer. We have a Rhyolite Ridge project, as you mentioned, located in the state of Nevada. So we're in the US. That is due to come online towards the end of 2025. It will become the largest lithium producer in the United States, quadrupling existing production. It'll also be a globally significant producer of boron. And those two make the combination of the lithium and boron make this a really unique deposit and a unique project as well. So that's where we're at today, and we are expecting to commence construction late next year. First production in the back half of 2025.
Sure. I think most people are aware of the lithium use cases, obviously, into the lithium-ion batteries, but people might not be as familiar with boron. Can you talk about the use cases for that and how it contributes into the project as well?
Yeah, sure. The boron actually is a really interesting commodity that no one ever talks about. And there's a variety of reasons for that, but one that you would think doesn't quite make sense is that you would think it is, but should be better known about because it's used in so many different applications. Every day, everyone would pick up, touch, use something that's got boron in it, probably at least half a dozen times without even realizing it. So I like to think of it about when you get up in the morning, you put your feet, as you get out of bed, you put your feet on your carpet. Okay, the fibers in carpets use boron in those fibers. Okay, in the back part of the carpet, the fabric is woven onto. So and then you pick up your phone and look if you've got any messages. Well, the glass on the screen, Gorilla Glass. The reason it's tough and so durable and yet so thin is because of boron used in that glass. Then you go into your kitchen and you might pick up a cup or a mug to have a breakfast. You put something on the stove, the glass top, induction cooktop, boron. So borosilicate glass is used in so many different applications. Now that's just in the home, and then you go and get in your car and you've got electric motors in your electric cars these days. Again, permanent magnets, boron, neodymium, iron, and boron. You will, go to a supermarket and buy food and groceries and produce, fresh fruit. Boric acid and boron products are used as a micronutrient in agriculture. It's used in your chassis of your car. In fact, Ford, who's one of our partners for our lithium, also use boron for hardening and making this chassis, the steel chassis of a car, lighter and stronger. It's used in solar panels. It's used in armor plating. It's used on spaceships and rockets. So it's just such a diverse range of applications, and yet we very rarely hear it talked about. Certainly nowhere near the extent that we hear things like rare earths and lithium talked about, and yet it really should be because it's a very rare material. There's only two places in the world where it's produced, the United States and Turkey, in any significant quantities. There's minor production elsewhere, but really it's a very, very critical or strategic material in itself.
It's a fantastic commodity to have on your hand, and obviously that's coupled with the lithium there. I know everyone's heard of lithium being called white gold. We can actually see it with the picture of Rhyolite Ridge behind you there, White Hill. Did you want to talk about what you've got on your hands at Rhyolite Ridge? It's a significant resource. It will be a significant, globally significant producer as well once it comes online.
Yeah, sure. So you're right. The White Hill behind me on this side, this is the outcrop of the ore at Rhyolite Ridge. So it's sticking out of the ground. It's right beside a road, so access is good. It's in a sort of fairly remote part of Nevada, so there's no competing land use, no farming or anything like that in this area. No people living anywhere near the site. The deposit itself, we have drilled out probably somewhere between a third of it and maybe up to a half of it. That sort of order, and we know the limits of it because it sticks out of the ground, so we can see where the edges of it are. And so there are parts that we haven't yet drilled. But of the parts that we have drilled, we have about 146 million tonnes of resource and about 60 million tonnes of reserve. Now, the 60 million tonnes of reserve, 2 years ago now, or more than bit over 2 years ago now, we completed a bankable feasibility study using just the reserve, just the 60 million tonnes. So there's 86 million tonnes that's sitting outside of the reserve that we haven't yet done the economics on. Now, that 60 million tonnes mined over 26-year period means you're going to be mining about 2.5 million tonnes of ore a year. And 2.5 million tonnes of ore is not a big mine at all by modern day standards. And from that material, we will produce about 22,000 tonnes of lithium carbonate a year and about 174,000 tonnes of boric acid. Okay, so there's a lot more volume in boric acid coming out of the production compared to the lithium, 20,000 or 22,000 versus 174,000. But if you look at a revenue split, and that the revenue, of course, depends on what pricing assumptions you use, but just using sort of conservative long-term average pricing for lithium and boron, then it's probably somewhere like 70-30 to 60-40 in favor of lithium in terms of the revenue. So this is a lithium operation, a lithium mining production facility with a lot of boron as a co-product.
Fascinating to hear. And I think when looking at some of the numbers, you're really aiming to be right down at the bottom of the cost curve. There's a few contributing factors there. Obviously, the boron production will help to contribute into that. I think it's fascinating too that you're also producing the LCE on site. Did you want to talk about some of the benefits that you see from Rhyolite Ridge as a project?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because it's one of the things that really, or two things that really differentiate this project. Firstly, the one that you've already touched on, the boron element. And by the way, that boron that the 170,000 plus tonnes a year and 30% of the revenue, 30 to 40% of the revenue, that pays for about 3/4 of our operating costs. So that's why we will be such a low cost producer, is because the boric acid basically covers about 3/4 of our operating costs. And so, that means we can produce lithium very, very cheaply. And there's very, very few lithium deposits anywhere in the world that have a co-product of that magnitude. You might get a small amount of some other products when you produce lithium from a brine operation or from a spodumene operation, but none of them have, plus $100 million like we do, or we will have from the sale of boric acid. And then the other element that really differentiates this in relation to your question is that this is a hard rock deposit, as you can see from the hill behind me. You have to drill and blast this material, and it starts at the surface and it sort of gradually dips into the ground. So it'll be an open pit, open quarry type operation, okay, with drill and blast. But we won't be making a mineral concentrate like is done for spodumene, which then gets, in the case of spodumene, mineral concentrate then gets transported somewhere else, mainly in the case of Australia, mainly offshore to Asia. And it's there that value add happens and the refining process happens to make lithium carbonate or lithium hydroxide. Now, spodumene concentrate is about around about 6% Li2O. So 94% of what's being transported is waste material. And that's why there's this very big difference in value of spodumene concentrate versus the end product, the lithium carbonate. Now, in our case, no mineral concentrate. So we take the rock, we crush it, we leach the lithium and the boron out of the rock at the mine site, and that lithium and boron goes into solution, and then we extract from that solution, we extract the lithium and the boron using known proven technology that's been in use for many, many decades, and we produce lithium chemicals, so lithium carbonate at the site. So what goes out on the truck is lithium carbonate and boric acid, end products, which have much, much higher value than a mineral concentrate would have.
For sure. And then talking about the product that you'll be producing, you've got your off-takers in line now. There's plenty of excitement there. Producing, as you said, just over 20,000 tons. Most recently, you've got Ford and then PPES come online. Did you want to talk about the customer base that you've got and really how you've chosen to assemble those customers?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. And, look, we've had a real strategy around this. It's a very carefully thought out strategy with the direction set firmly from the top, i.e. our board. So this is, as you know, this is a project that's located in the United States, second largest car market in the world. And so our board mandated us, the management, to ensure that the lithium that we produce here ends up in US electric cars. And we've done that through the offtake agreements that we've put in place. Now, there's a couple of different ways to achieve that. So raw material could be mined in Nevada and sent to Japan or Korea for incorporation into cathodes and batteries, and then sent back to the US, which is essentially what happens today. Is that, well, the US doesn't really produce much lithium at all today, but all of the batteries that are going into US electric cars, those cathodes and the battery cells, they're manufactured in either Japan, Korea, or China. So we could supply into that supply chain and send material offshore. And we may well have to do some of that at the beginning because there just isn't the capacity today in the US to do all of the full supply chain domestically. But what we've done particularly with Ford and Prime Planet, and Prime Planet being the joint venture between Toyota and Panasonic, what we've done is we've said, we want this lithium, it must go into US electric vehicles, okay? And the way we see that as that supply chain develops in the US is this material will be dug up in Nevada, and it'll be refined in the United States. It'll go into cathodes and batteries in the United States, and then eventually into US manufactured cars. And by the way, that's, we've always had that view that was the right thing for us to do with this project. But on top of that, there's a real economic incentive for us to do that and for the car makers to make sure that we're doing that. And that's particularly exemplified through the recent incentives that have been outlined in the Inflation Reduction Act that's just been passed by the US government, where it's stimulating this full domestic supply chain. So we're going all the way from rock to road, from the mine to the car, the full supply chain within the United States. And it doesn't exist today, but we can be certain that it's going to be very substantial supply chain by the end of this decade.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. Obviously, I think most people watching the news have seen the Inflation Reduction Act. They've seen the push towards decarbonisation, localisation of supply chains. But you're right there, having the discussions with stakeholders, engaging with customers. What's the sentiment like? And really, how has this transition been over the past few months as you've seen the focus really ramp up?
So I think, the mood I would describe as there's been a paradigm shift, firstly, okay, in the last, say, 6 to 12 months. The world has changed, okay, and in more ways than one, and some of it good and some of it not so good, and so, but clearly there's been a very, very dramatic or paradigm shift in the focus on security of supply chain and domestic supply chain. And also, coupled with that, of course, is security of energy supply and addressing climate change. And you can wrap all those things together if you like, and they're all interrelated, of course. So I think there's been a major shift in the importance of these issues and for concrete action to be taken. And so we're seeing that play out. I think another word I would use to describe the mood would be challenging. It's a challenging thing to do. These supply chains don't exist today. Domestic production in the United States for lithium is virtually absent. It's 5,000 tonnes or 6,000 tonnes of lithium a year. That's the total domestic supply of lithium in the United States. And you compare that to what's talked about as being required by the end of this decade, 600,000 tonnes to 1 million tonnes. So the 5,000 tonnes it's not even a drop in the ocean. So that it's a very challenging and daunting task ahead. And, the IRA has got a number of parts to it that are meant to incentivize that and subsidize that development of that domestic supply chain. But it's not going to be easy to do because, without the raw materials for a start, and then without the manufacturing and the knowledge and the skills to develop the full supply chain, none of it's impossible, but it's going to be a daunting task to get it to where they're hoping it to be, particularly within the time frame of this decade. We're only 7 years left in the decade. There's a lot to be done in 7 years. As I've told you before, we've been working on this project for 6 years already, and have invested well north of $100 million into it. So particularly the raw materials takes time to develop the supply.
Well, I guess building on that then, you've talked about 20,000 tonne per annum. There's evidently demand there that's only forecast to continue to grow. You've got plenty of resource that could transition to reserve, plenty of areas to continue to drill. Is there thoughts about that phase 2 and scaling up production as we move to 2030 and beyond?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one thing, again, that you could probably use to describe our approach, Ioneer's approach to developing Rhyolite Ridge, is that we've been conservative. We've said, let's get this first part of the project financed and construction underway, etc. And, we've ticked many of those boxes now. We've still got a couple to go, admittedly, but we're very, very close. And so, it was always our intention, of course, that at the appropriate time, we will turn some of our attention to how do we increase the lithium production from this deposit in the future. There's no question that there's going to be demand, and clearly with the agreements with Ford, with Prime Planet, and I didn't mention before, but EcoPro, one of the world's leading cathode manufacturers, a Korean company that we also have an agreement with. Those three are our key partners. And, what we're hearing from all of them is that they want a lot more lithium than what we've been able to supply to them. Our offtake agreements are sort of between 4,000 and 7,000 tonnes each for those parties. So that adds up to be about 18,000 with the 4,000 as a bit of a buffer for us. But, the reality is that all of these groups want a lot more than that. And there's others out there, of course, other car manufacturers in the United States who are also wanting very, very substantial quantities. I mentioned the number before of, 600,000 to 1 million tonnes by the end of this decade is what the projections are. In the nearer term, I think the number that's quoted by Benchmark for 2026, and that's only a couple of years away, is over 300,000 tonnes. Okay, so absolutely, we're thinking very carefully and seriously about how do we, in the future, increase our lithium production without wanting to get ahead of ourselves, without losing any focus at all on the main game, and that is getting Rhyolite Ridge phase 1 into production. But of course, we have plans and strategies around future expansions, and we definitely have demand for it.
And just to clarify that pathway towards construction and then production, obviously there's a few different catalysts up ahead. You're waiting on news on the DOE loans, final sets of permits as well. Can you talk about kind of what the next catalyst to watch for moving forward investors should look out to?
Yeah, sure. Happy to do that. So I guess, yeah, that you've just flagged a couple of the big ones I would describe them as. So for those who don't know about the Department of Energy LPO Loan Program Office, we applied and were approved, our application approved, and we were invited in to do formal detailed due diligence with the Loan Program Office of the Department of Energy. That was in December of last year. So we've spent most of this year doing detailed due diligence with the LPO. And so we're getting close to the pointy end of that process. And, that's going to be something that we would hope to be announcing. I think we gave guidance that it would be before the end of this calendar year. So fourth quarter of the calendar year is when we would expect to be able to say something about that. I mean, that's only a guide because we don't know exactly, but we know that we've completed most of the due diligence, and we would be expecting an outcome on that, or a decision rather on it. We think we're in a very good position. No guarantee, of course, but we are one of the most advanced lithium projects, if not the most advanced lithium project in the United States. We still have some permitting to do, yes, but we're funded already for half the capex via our equity partnership with Sibanye-Stillwater. So in that sense, we're in a very good place for securing that DOE funding, but let's wait and see. I think the other one is on the permitting side of things. We started a permitting process, or started the more formal part of it early last year with what's called a submission of a plan of operations to the federal government, which is required. This deposit's located on federal land. We started that process. We asked for permission, or we sought permission to move some sensitive plants that are out in this area as part of that, but that we would also then look after those plants and have them as part of our development plan and conservation plan and reclamation plan. But anyway, we realised that wasn't going to be an option for us, so we went back and modified our mine plans to avoid those plants, so we didn't need to move any of them, so there's no direct impact. We resubmitted that in July, and we're just waiting on the next part of that formal process to commence, which is called NEPA process, and we're expecting that will start fairly soon, and it'll run through the remainder of this year and into certainly the first half of next year, and probably a bit beyond that, and that towards around this time in 12 months from now, we would be expecting that we would have a result from that. But on news flow, I guess specifically, then the next step in the permitting would be the commencement of this NEPA process, and we're expecting that anytime soon over the next couple of months.
And then kind of high level potential dates for starting construction and then production back into 2025, I believe.
Yeah, that's right. So we would be looking at commencing construction at the end of next year with that permitting, subject to that permitting. We already have the equity in place, as I mentioned, through our partnership with Sibanye-Stillwater. That's a $500 million deal, US dollars. So they would fund that part of the capex required. It'll be a 2-year build. So assuming we start at the end of 2023, we would be finishing at the end of 2025. That would be our first production and ramp up. And that's obviously a broad time frame from today. And so in addition to that, I would add, you touched on it before about the potential for expansions and resource expansions and etc. You will see our attention during that period. Some of our efforts will turn to that, answering those questions, and you'll see news flow around that as we progress through the construction period of the main project. We'll be looking at other options and alternatives and expansion opportunities, all these sorts of things.
Plenty to look forward to. It's great to have that timeline there. I always like to ask as well, it's been littered throughout the conversation, but would love to ask you, what is that lithium market outlook that you see, and where do you think things are heading?
I guess I should sort of caveat by saying, we're not lithium price and market forecasters, but there's plenty of people out there who specialise in that area. However, so take this for what it's worth. We see that the US is our focus, as we've made clear, and the US is the second largest car market in the world, and the US want a domestic supply chain, and they want domestic supply of critical materials, including lithium. So in that sense, what happens outside of the US has, everything has impact, but the domestic supply is always going to be built, okay? And as long as it's cost competitive, and in our case, that's clearly the case, as per the feasibility study completed with Fluor. We think that prices are going to stay higher for longer, which is where most analysts and banks are forecasting now as well. And that's just simple supply-demand imbalance. There was talk that there might be, another period of oversupply or a sort of a bit of surplus. I'm not saying that won't happen. It always happens with every commodity. When it happens and how it happens, not too many people get those predictions right. I would add, though, that in the case of lithium, having worked on this project for 6 years, it's very, very difficult to bring new greenfields lithium online in timeframes that people think might be doable or achievable. It's not easy, and there's a whole heap of reasons for it. You're talking about new technologies, for example, in some cases. In our case, we had to build a pilot plant, which we did a couple of years ago, and demonstrate, through a $20-odd million pilot program, how this flow sheet works. There's new technologies. There's in our case, application of existing technologies to a different type of deposit that haven't been done before. There are people that are looking at developing projects that are much, much lower grade than what we've looked at before, different mineralogy than we've done before in the lithium world. So all of those things are not easy to quickly click your fingers and bring on stream. And then on top of that, you've got environmental issues, water, land use, footprint, community issues, tribal issues that you'll have to deal with as well, environmental issues. The bottom line is it takes time, and I think in general there's been an overly optimistic view on how quickly new production can come on stream. And in the last 10 years, I would say there is very, very few examples where that new production has actually come online in the timeframes that were predicted. It's nearly always the opposite.
Appreciate you sharing your thoughts, and it'll be fascinating to see where it evolves. I guess, final question, did you have any final reflections for those longer term shareholders who have followed the Ioneer story, or prospective shareholders who might now just be learning about Ioneer?
Yeah, I think the way I would sort of wrap things up perhaps would be that, we have the best lithium project in the United States. We've worked on it diligently for 6 years. We're bearing the fruits of that labour. That's why we've been able to secure binding offtake agreements and partnerships with Ford, with the Toyota Panasonic joint venture, Prime Planet, with EcoPro. It's why we've been able to secure a fantastic partner like Sibanye-Stillwater to provide the equity to build the project. It really is what differentiates Ioneer and Rhyolite Ridge from many other companies and projects that are out there. And, that is underpinned by two things. One is a fantastic asset, okay? A world-class deposit by any measure is what you have at Rhyolite Ridge. It's got the potential to be much, much larger than it is today, and hence it's got the potential to be a major sort of cornerstone supplier or key supplier within the US supply chain for the next century. And that's pretty exciting. And the second thing is the people to deliver it. And, I'm fortunate that I've got a wonderful board who provide the necessary guidance through this maze. And we've got a fantastic team on the ground in Reno and right across the board, from our metallurgists, geologists, engineers, environmental scientists, our support staff, a really great team. And that's why we've been able to achieve so much in the short space of time that we have. And that's why I think we will be the next domestic production for lithium in the United States. And I think if we cement ourselves as a critical cog in that wheel or component within that domestic supply chain, that's going to bode extremely well for our company in the years and the decades to come.
That is the Ioneer story. It's ASX INR, recently listed on the NASDAQ as well with an ADR listing. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to share it out. Make sure you like, subscribe, turn your bell notifications on. It's Bernard Rowe. It was a pleasure catching up and look forward to speaking again soon.
Pleasure to be with you today. Thank you.